It's a late summer afternoon in 1100. King William II of England rides into the lush thickets of the New Forest chasing a stag. By sunset, the 43-year-old monarch lies dead on the forest floor, an arrow through his chest. It sounds like a scene from a fantasy drama, a royal hunting quote-unquote accident worthy of Game of Thrones. But this was the grim reality for the king known as William Rufus. The mysterious circumstances of his death have fueled speculation for almost a millennia, and will probably keep doing so for another 1,000 years after. William II, commonly called William Rufus for his ruddy complexion or his red hair, was the third son of William the Conqueror. When his father died in 1087, he split his domains between his sons. The eldest, Robert, inherited Normandy, while William Rufus received the crown of England. The youngest brother, Henry, got a hefty monetary inheritance, but was left devoid of any meaningful holdings. William II ruled England from 1087 until that ominous day in 1100, carrying on his father's Norman legacy. He never married and left no children, a fact that meant a brother would be his heir, a detail that later raised eyebrows when William suddenly died. In his day, William II was a bold and stern ruler. He was no saintly king, quite the opposite if you believe the chronicles. He was described by contemporaries as being addicted to every vice imaginable, in an era where kings were supposed to be moral exemplars. He quarreled fiercely with the church, even driving the revered Archbishop Anselm into exile over disputes about church authority. The monks who wrote the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle painted him in the bleakest colors, saying William was, quote, hated by almost all his people and abhorrent to God. Yet for all his vices, William Rufus was an effective monarch in many ways. He kept order in his realm and extended Norman control into Wales and even over the Scottish king. At the start of the First Crusade, Robert pawned Normandy to him so he could partake in the expedition, a fact that's important to keep in mind going forward. William's reign was significant in consolidating Norman rule, but it was also marked by rebellion, heavy taxation, and mistrust between the king and powerful nobles and churchmen. By the summer of 1100, tensions and intrigues swirled around the crown. William's elder brother Robert was still overseas, returning from the First Crusade. His younger brother Henry remained in court, ambitious and waiting in the wings. It was against this backdrop that King William II set out on a hunting expedition that would cost him his life. On August 2nd, 1100, King William rode out from Winchester Castle for a day of hunting in the New Forest of Hampshire. The royal party included William's younger brother Prince Henry and a number of noble companions, among them a knight named Sir Walter Tyrrell. Hunting was a favorite sport of the king, but it was also dangerous. In fact, William's own older brother Richard had been killed in a hunting accident in the New Forest years earlier. He literally hit his head on a branch and died, a freak accident that led to the belief amongst locals that the Anglo-Saxons had cursed these woods. Superstitions aside, the stage was set for high drama in the woods. As the hunt commenced, the party spread out to chase game through the woods. King William and Sir Walter found themselves riding together apart from the others. According to later chroniclers, ominous signs had tried to halt the king that day. One monk reportedly warned William of a nightmare predicting his death if he hunted, but the headstrong king laughed it off. The sun began to dip low, casting blinding shafts of light between the trees. A stag bolted past the king, and William drew his bow and loosed an arrow, nicking the animal but not bringing it down. Eager to finish the hunt, he shouted for Sir Walter to take a shot. Sir Walter let fly an arrow, but rather than striking down a stag, the arrow found itself stuck in William's chest, puncturing his lung. Shocked and reeling, the king managed to break off the protruding shaft, but collapsed on the spot, bleeding out rapidly. It was all over in moments, and the King of England lay dead on the forest floor. Sir Walter rushed to the fallen king's side, but there was nothing to be done, and panic set in among the hunters. After it became clear he couldn't do a thing, Sir Walter immediately mounted his horse and fled the scene. The rest of the hunting party, including Prince Henry, also scattered in alarm, and not one of them stayed with William's body. Later that day, some local peasants stumbled upon the king's corpse, which I assume was a tale which was passed down in their families for generations. In a humble cart, they bore William's body to Winchester Cathedral. The once mighty monarch was buried the next day under a plain marble slab with shockingly little ceremony. The unseemly haste and lack of dignity in his burial didn't go unnoticed, and it was as if everyone just wanted to move on, and quickly. News of King William II's death sent ripples of astonishment through the kingdom. Almost immediately, whispers that the whole thing had been a setup began. After all, William's younger brother Henry had been present at the scene and stood to gain immensely from William's demise. With the king dead and the eldest brother Robert absent in the Holy Land, Henry moved with breathtaking speed. He didn't linger to mourn. In fact, Henry abandoned his brother's body where it fell and raced off to secure power for himself. He rode straight to Winchester, seized control of the royal treasury, and by the very next day had himself proclaimed king. 3 days after William's death, before Robert could return to assert his own claim, Henry was crowned King Henry I of England. He even bypassed waiting for the Archbishop of Canterbury and had the Bishop of London crown him, so urgent was his grab for the throne. Such ruthless efficiency raised eyebrows, and convenient barely begins to describe Henry's windfall. And it's very important to remember here that as a younger son, he had a much less legitimate claim to the throne than his Crusader brother, who was also Duke of Normandy. As contemporaries observed, he seemed to know exactly what to do to seize the levers of power the moment William was eliminated. Could Prince Henry have orchestrated his brother's death? Medieval chroniclers were cautious. None openly accused Henry of regicide, perhaps because accusing a king was dangerous. Instead, church chroniclers framed William's fall as God's judgment on an impious ruler, but rumors quietly persisted. People noticed troubling details. For instance, why was Sir Walter Tyrrell never charged or even formally accused? Contemporaries thought that surely he had at the very least let loose the arrow that struck down the king in such a negligent way as to deserve punishment. In fact, Tyrrell escaped to France and suffered no punishment at all. Despite his escape, King Henry left his vast estates in England intact, and they were passed to his heirs without any problem. This seemed extraordinary, given that he had literally shot down a king, albeit supposedly by misfortune. Years later, Sir Walter himself vehemently denied guilt in the king's death, swearing under oath that it was not by his hand. He claimed that another arrow hit the king while they were out that day. Putting that aside, others noted how Henry immediately honored and rewarded certain nobles who had been in the hunting party. Many have questioned whether these payments weren't to ensure loyalty to the new king, but rather to secure silence. Opinions amongst modern historians remain heavily divided, much as they have since 1100. On one hand, many argue that William's death was simply a mishap of the hunt. Hunting was always a risky activity in medieval Europe, and going into the New Forest, thick with oak, was no different. People can get lost in the adrenaline of the chase and fire an arrow without calculating where it may go if it doesn't hit its mark. That said, the assassination theory refuses to disappear, and not without reason. The chain of events is almost too perfect in benefiting Henry. With Robert still abroad, William's quote-unquote accident removed the one obstacle between Henry and the throne. Given that he was on his return from the First Crusade, the timing was perhaps just a little too perfect. After all, Robert was the Duke of Normandy, with substantial continental holdings, while Prince Henry was wealthy, but virtually landless. Whether the event was a simple accident that changed the course, or the result of a larger plot, will likely never be fully resolved. All that said, the timing was too perfect for Prince Henry, and his subsequent actions do speak to his guilt. That said, perhaps Prince Henry was simply a man who wasn't willing to let a good crisis go to waste. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to check out my other channel, Lazy Chill Zone, for contemporary mysteries. Also be sure to take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who's a fan of English or medieval history. In the early 13th century, a royal mystery unfolded that would haunt the reign of King John of England. In April 1203, Arthur of Brittany, a teenager with a claim to the English throne, vanished without a trace while imprisoned by his own uncle. Arthur's disappearance sent shockwaves through England and France, altering the political landscape and earning King John infamy for treachery. Arthur of Brittany was born in 1187 into the tumultuous Angevin royal family. He was the posthumous son of Geoffrey Plantagenet, the fourth son of King Henry II of England, and Constance, Duchess of Brittany. This made Arthur a grandson of Henry II, and importantly, a nephew of King Richard the Lionheart and King John. In fact, as the son of an older brother of John, young Arthur had a strong claim to the English crown under the principle of primogeniture, inheritance through the eldest line. Further complicating things was the fact that King Richard the Lionheart had once acknowledged Arthur as his heir presumptive in 1190 in the absence of his own legitimate children. Since Richard ended up dying without a legitimate heir, Arthur represented the next generation. However, politics shifted in the 1190s, and Arthur was raised at the French court of King Philip II. Philip saw this as an opportunity to use the boy to fracture the Angevin Empire. By 1199, when Richard the Lionheart died, two candidates stood for the throne of England: John, Richard's younger brother, and Arthur, Richard's 12-year-old nephew. The question of succession was hotly contested, as medieval law was unclear and power often went to the swift and strong rather than the closest in blood. In the years leading up to his death, Richard ultimately preferred John as his heir, despite earlier proclamations, reportedly feeling Arthur was too young to rule in a dangerous time. John, aged roughly 32, had himself crowned in England and secured the support of many Norman and English barons. But in the French territories of the Plantagenet Empire, many saw Arthur as the rightful heir. He was backed by King Philip II of France, who recognized Arthur's claim to vast and wealthy provinces like Brittany, Anjou, Maine, and Aquitaine. As such, the boy became a rallying figure for non-Norman continental nobles resisting John. In 1299 and 1200, a succession crisis turned into a tug-of-war, with Philip II scheming to profit from the discord. John moved swiftly to consolidate power. In 1200, he struck a deal with Philip II that temporarily brought peace. Philip recognized John as King of England and feudal lord in Normandy. John, for his part, conceded some lands and favors to Philip. This truce sidelined Arthur's immediate ambitions, and for a brief moment the young duke even appears to have been on cordial terms with John. However, this peace was short-lived. By 1202, John's heavy-handed tactics in Angevin French territory gave Philip II an excuse to resume hostilities. Philip declared John's French fiefs forfeit and again championed Arthur's cause. The war reignited in 1202. Philip invaded Normandy from the east, while Arthur, now about 15, led an attack in Poitou to the south. In July 1202, Arthur and his French allies besieged a castle in Poitou, where Arthur's own grandmother, the formidable Eleanor of Aquitaine, John's mother, was trapped. This daring move proved Arthur's resolve to claim his inheritance, but it also led to his downfall. King John, often criticized for his military ineptitude and general lack of foresight, reacted with uncharacteristic speed and cunning. Marching overnight to relieve the siege, John surprised Arthur's forces on August 1st, 1202. The result was a complete rout of the rebels. The young Duke of Brittany was captured by John's troops. Eleanor of Aquitaine was saved, and John took many prisoners that day. Contemporary accounts note that Arthur was taken in chains to the strong castle of Falaise in Normandy. This victory was a high point of John's reign since he had eliminated the immediate threat by his rival heir. However, this gave rise to the immediate question what to do with Arthur, as executing a close family member for pressing a contested claim was considered socially unacceptable. Despite that, the teenager was a dangerous figurehead. As long as he lived, and even in captivity, Arthur's claim could inspire rebellions from unhappy continental nobles. King John faced a stark choice: spare his teenage nephew and risk future uprisings, or permanently remove this threat to his throne. John's treatment of Arthur soon demonstrated the depths of his ruthlessness. At Falaise, Arthur was placed under the guard of Hubert de Burgh, one of John's trusted knights and retainers. According to Ralph of Coggeshall, a chronicler writing at the time, King John didn't intend to simply keep Arthur as a bargaining chip. Coggeshall records that John ordered Hubert to blind and castrate Arthur, a shocking command even by medieval standards. In that era, in Western Europe, it was generally unheard of for a high-born captive, especially a prince of royal blood, to be mutilated. Noble prisoners were usually held for ransom or political leverage and treated honorably while in custody. John's neutering order violated the chivalric codes of war, underscoring how badly he wanted Arthur neutralized. Hubert de Burgh, to his credit, refused to carry out such a cruel deed. He could not bring himself to maim the young duke in such a disgusting way. Instead, Hubert spread a false rumor that Arthur had died of natural causes, hoping to appease John, or at least buy time. Unfortunately, this ploy backfired. When news reached Arthur's native Brittany that the captive duke was quote-unquote dead, the Bretons erupted in anger, suspecting foul play. Far from quelling unrest, the rumor of Arthur's death only inflamed it. John realized that Arthur being alive and Arthur rumored dead were both rallying points for rebellion, and so long as the Bretons did not see Arthur safe, they would fear the worst. Sometime in late 1202, John decided to move Arthur to a more secure location. The young prisoner was transferred to the towering fortress of Rouen, the capital of Normandy, early in 1203. There, Arthur was placed in the custody of William de Bruce, the same baron who had helped capture him. Rouen Castle, with its thick walls above the river Seine, was a royal stronghold where John could better control the boy's fate. As spring 1203 arrived, King John's fortunes in France were deteriorating. Philip II was winning victories in Normandy. It was against this turbulent backdrop that Arthur of Brittany disappeared. By April 1203, the 15-year-old duke simply vanished from Rouen. There were no official announcements of his death, no body was displayed, and no public funeral was held. Arthur, once a pawn in a war between kings, was now just simply gone, and apparently memory hold. His sister Eleanor was quietly kept prisoner in England for years to ensure no other rival claims emerged. But of Arthur, nothing more was heard after April 1203, and the sudden silence was as ominous as it was deafening. Whispers spread in both England and France that King John had disposed of his nephew in the darkest way imaginable. The mysterious fate of Arthur of Brittany spawned numerous theories, both among contemporaries and in later retellings. Contemporary chroniclers were extremely cautious in recording the event. Some, like Roger of Wendover in England, noted simply that Arthur disappeared in 1203, offering no details, a stark admission of uncertainty. Others, however, directly accused King John of slaying his nephew. The annals of Margam Abbey in Wales, for instance, give a chilling account. According to this telling, after keeping Arthur alive in Rouen for some time, King John, deep in his cups, bludgeoned the captive Arthur personally and had his corpse tossed in the river Seine. A French chronicler independently recounted a similar story stating that John slew Arthur and threw the corpse into the river. These claims, if true, mark one of the most heinous crimes in English royal history. An uncle and sitting king, divinely ordained by the Lord to rule, slaying his own vassal, of ducal status no less, who happened to be his own nephew, to shore up the security of his throne. To put it in terms the average Crusader King's player can understand, the tales of John's misdeeds were known from Ireland to Cathay. But not all stories put the dagger directly in King John's hand. Another theory posits that John ordered Arthur snuffed out quietly by his henchmen. In this vein, rumors swirled around the role of William de Bruce, Arthur's jailer at Rouen. William de Bruce was a close associate of John, and after Arthur vanished, the king heaped rewards on him, granting him new lands and titles in the years following 1203. This raised suspicions that de Bruce was being richly rewarded for doing John's dirty work. In 1208, as King John's power began to unravel, William de Bruce's wife, Lady Matilda, publicly accused John of the worst sin. She publicly declared that John had slain his own nephew Arthur. This accusation was extraordinary, a noblewoman directly blaming the king for Arthur's death, and it did not go unpunished. Enraged, John swiftly moved against the de Bruce family. Matilda and her eldest son were captured and imprisoned in harsh conditions, and by 1210, they had been starved to death on King John's orders. This disturbing act strongly suggested to contemporaries that Matilda's charge was true, and that John would destroy anyone who dared voice that dark secret. There were also alternative tales of Arthur's fate that didn't involve such deliberate cruelty. One such story is essentially an accidental death theory. This account found its most famous expression in literature rather than in medieval chronicles. William Shakespeare, in his historical play King John, dramatized Arthur's demise in a tragic accident. In the play, Arthur is depicted as trying to escape captivity. The panicked Arthur attempts to flee his tower prison and falls to his death from the high window. Some historians believe that this was a popular rumor that had developed in the centuries after the death of Arthur. Other historians, however, believe that this was invented so as not to portray a king of England as a complete monster, while also still indicating that King John played a part. Notably, King Philip II of France either believed something sinister had happened or was smart enough to capitalize upon this wide belief. Philip had been using Arthur's cause as a political weapon, and when Arthur vanished, Philip summoned John to appear at the French court to answer for his nephew's fate. And let me just briefly explain how King Philip had this authority to summon a fellow king. King John was a vassal to the King of France for his French lands like Normandy and Aquitaine. Though he was completely sovereign in England itself, and in his role as English king, his continental titles required him to pay homage to the French king and respond to his summons. Interestingly, this is one of many reasons that historians can get more than a little uncomfortable with calling the Plantagenet kingdom the Angevin Empire. Despite this feudal relationship, John refused to appear and explain himself to Philip, an act that Philip took as proof of guilt. Seizing the opportunity, Philip II proceeded to confiscate almost all of John's lands in France, a devastating blow to the Angevin Empire. By the end of 1204, King John had lost Normandy, Anjou, and other territories, largely because Arthur's disappearance undermined support for John among his French vassals. In this way, Arthur's death had profound political consequences. It rallied opposition against John and contributed to the collapse of his French domain. The mystery of Arthur's fate, therefore, isn't just a footnote. It helped reshape medieval geopolitics and helped cement King John as one of the worst English monarchs ever.